Cool. I feel like I need a brew actually, but I'm not going to have one. Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Retropower Uncut. I'm going to start with the Land Cruiser. So we fitted the windscreen today, so that was quite an exciting step forward. Always makes a big visual transformation when you start putting glass into something, because the seals just seem to finish all the flanges that subconsciously made the car look a bit unfinished until that point. So we had Pilkington make us a fine wire heated windscreen for it. So we got that in today. Adam's then put the visors in, the interior mirror in, and something that was going on towards the tail end of last week was Jim was doing a trial fit of the rear seat, getting all of the movement of that nice and smooth. And then when we've designed that, so when it folds forward, it latches with some metal bolts. There are basically metal bolts that latch the back in the upright position. You pull those in, that folds forward. Then the whole base folds forward or folds up, so it's almost flush against the back of the front seats. And then we've got the same bolts going into some little tubes in the side of the shell. And Jim was just machining up some little nylon inserts into those that the bolts slide into to latch in the upright position. Nylon so that the paint doesn't get scratched off them, and so there we can machine them to a nice fit on the bolts. So that's looking good. Moving on from that, Adam M has been on almost entirely with wiring on the Mustang. I think I mentioned last week that we were using a generic loom, I can't remember, I think it might be American Auto wire actually off the top of my head, which was supplied by the owner. Which kind of covers the basics, and it is a fairly basic car, so there's not a huge amount missing on it, but it does involve, because it's a generic loom for any car, it does involve a lot of cutting wires to size, routing them neatly, obviously all the termination work on the ends. And then there was a little bit to add, and one thing that makes me chuckle every time on this is, perhaps there's something about the target market for it. It had a dedicated feed for a CB radio, but not one for a screen wash pump, which makes me chuckle. So that was one of the things we had to add. We also added in some wiring for the fan, so we put a fan relay in there. The wiring for the air conditioning pressure switch, so there's a little pressure switch in the refrigerant line that has two switched circuits in it. One of them does both an under pressure and over pressure, and the feed to the compressor goes via that. So when the aircon is supposed to be on, that switch will cut the compressor if the pressure in the system drops too low or goes too high. And then there's also a second switch in the same unit which switches the fan, so when the aircon compressor kicks in and the refrigerant pressure reaches a certain point, it will then put the electric fan on, which will then obviously blow through the condenser. And it's actually remarkable how quickly that affects it. When you're actually charging those systems up and you've got the pressure gauges on, you can watch the pressure rise as the compressor kicks in. And then it's amazing how quick, when the fan blows, you can see the pressure just rocket straight back down again and the fan kick back out. It's amazing how quick an effect it has. So yes, Adam's basically adding in additional wires for things like that pressure switch, screen wash pump, various other bits and bobs, and then going through the process of cutting everything to length, routing it really neatly, securing everything, heat shrinking everything, terminating everything. He's just about finished the engine bay now. I think he's got headlights to finish off, a few other little bits of tidying up, and then we're going to be moving through into the inside of the car. But I reckon another week we'll probably be getting through that pretty well. So that's that, and big change, the Camaro, which is now rolling. So I think we showed this just fresh from paint last week. We'd already got all the parts powder coated. In fact, I probably mentioned about the fact we were getting things off being powder coated, plated, Xylan coated, so that when the shell was done, we could get everything together pretty quickly, and sure enough, that's what's happened. So John and I have been working on this over the last few days. We got the rear axle in. Most of the sort of main subframe parts of it are from Speed Tech Engineering in the States. So the front subframe, and it's really nicely made stuff actually, I've got to say. The front subframe, the wishbone arrangement, the front uprights, all Speed Tech. It's a Dutchman rear axle casing, but bracketed with Speed Tech brackets on Speed Tech trailing arms, and then it's got their kind of backbone, I'd call it, which is a big brace that goes under the diff and extends all the way forward to a cross member that's actually bolted to the same mount points as the rear mounting points of the front subframe. So that's a really long member that sits underneath the prop, and that's essentially what gives it the rotational location. So it only has 2 trailing arms, and then that big link provides the other trailing arm effectively, and then an adjustable panhard rod. And it's a really nicely made setup. So that's all in now. Then we've got the brakes on, so it's running bare brakes front and back, 4 pots on the rear with the handbrake shoes integrated inside the bells on the discs, 6 pots on the front. Again, really nicely engineered arrangement. So with that lot on, we were basically rolling, and we got to that point yesterday. And then today we've got the engine and transmission in, dropped that in, no drama with that, that all went to plan. And then at the moment we're just in the process of fitting this upper subframe. So this is the main part that we've made in terms of the framework on the car. So that bolts onto the bulkhead and then picks up on the various mounting points on the lower subframe to brace it all together. And then this is essentially the bit that we've designed that everything else hangs off then, to replace the original design where the bonnet hinges were mounted to the outer wings, which is a really strange design. And also everything originally is sort of rubber mounted, which seems a bit odd. You've got the subframe rubber mounted, which makes sense from a vibration point of view, but then originally the outer bodywork at the front is mounted to a rubber mounted subframe, which all seems a bit odd because obviously you get a lot of movement. So everything's now solid mounted. It's a Speedtech solid mount kit for that subframe, which then gave us the confidence to have this solid mounted frame here. And then the inner wing panels that we've made that go on here have got studs on them, which go through here. And then the outer wings slot over those and the nuts go on from underneath, so there's no visible fasteners for the wings at all. And then the bonnet hinges, so we've got Ring Brothers machined hinges which go onto these tubes here. So the bonnet's actually mounted independently of the outer wings, unlike original. And then the rest of the sort of tinware in inner sort of shroud around here, around the radiator. We've got another top piece which we'll show you next week, which goes over the top of the engine. And then the sort of front nose panel, if you like, here, and the underneath panel. So we're basically getting to the point where we can hang all that on, which is where I want it to be. Because we just haven't got the space. There's so many panels on this, it fills an entire one of those huge sort of panel trees that we've got next door. And I really just want to get all the panels onto it so we can free up some storage space. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. I think you'll agree it's looking pretty awesome. I think it's one of the cars I've been most excited to see take shape, really, because I just think the colour choice, the body shape, the wheels, it's just a great combination. So that's that. E-Type. James has been working on this, as has George. James is just working on the throttle actuator mounting, and yesterday we were going through how we're going to go about the coil mounting. And it's a bit of a headache, actually. Originally, the original V12s had a dizzy in the middle, and then this, which is a 6 litre from an X300 XJ12, has this cast piece here, which then mounts 2 6-cylinder coil packs under here. But with the Gen V throttle bodies and manifolds, those don't fit under there. And we were trying to come up with basically a coil pack arrangement where it looks really neat. In an ideal world, we'd have had it individual coil on plug, just because it's nice to have fully sequential sparks, but it doesn't really matter that much in the scheme of things, because we can fire wasted spark and batch fire several spark plugs at the same time. So we kind of been through the motions of, we couldn't find any pencil coils that were compact enough to fit directly on the plugs. Then we looked at doing coil near plug, if you like, so individual coils, a bit like on a Chevy LS, for each cylinder in a very short leads. But to get 12 of them in there, even with the smallest units we could find, you could just about come up with an arrangement where they'd all fit, but then I just wasn't happy with the fact you're going to have 12 plugs under there, actual plugs onto the coils, 12 plug leads, and all of it's inaccessible under the manifold. And it started to seem like erring too much in the direction of doing it for cosmetics rather than practicality. So what we've decided in the end is actually still to use 2 6-cylinder coil packs and mount them at the front here. I think side by side like this, so they'll come out to about the same distance as this water pipe here. And our plan for this has always been to cover this whole assembly, which you'll probably think your initial thought is sacrilege to cover this amazing set of 12 trumpets. But actually, by the time you've got the throttle linkages in, which we thought initially might be able to hide underneath, but the way the manifolds sit, you just cannot get the linkage down from the top to get it underneath. So it's going to have to stay on the top. And then you've got fuel rails with all the injector plugs, and actually it starts to look fairly messy. So we'll come up with a really nice kind of art piece cover that sits over the centre, and then we're going to have air boxes each side which kind of complete that look of the engine, and this central cover will cover the coil packs at the front. So we're happy with that, because that means you can completely access all the plug leads and the connectors onto the coil packs with them there. And then the throttle motor, this is the electric throttle actuator, which is what will open and close the throttle. Jim's just designing the bracket for that now, but that will mount somewhere near the back here. And then there'll be a link rod coming down the side of here. He's just designing a new version of this. This is the stuff that comes from Gen V, but we want to do a slightly nicer version of this. So we're going to do a machined bracket to take a proper bearing in the middle, and then a circular quadrant with just 3 concentric rows of round holes. So we've got lots of different mounting point options. And then there'll be a link rod coming down the side of here from the motor to that quadrant, which is what will actually actuate all the throttles. And then obviously we'll have an electric throttle pedal. Big benefit of doing that really is idle control. It does make, because individual throttle body setups like this, one of the complications can be idle control. You can do it with the ignition, but you don't get a very big range of control. So really you need an air valve, which then needs to have an air connection to every single runner, which then starts to look messy. And with the electric actuator, you can essentially map it so that when it's cold, it holds the throttle open slightly, or just like you holding your foot on the throttle. So that's a good solution. You have to excuse me coughing and spluttering. I'm just in the tail end of shedding the COVID I've had last week, so do excuse that. So that's where we're at with that. The other thing George has been working on is the rear bumper design. So we're actually doing a rear bumper design that's going to be machined from solid, or possibly we'll machine a mould and cast it, but I think it's probably going to be machined from billet in 3 separate pieces. So there's a central section and 2 sides. And then the lights will be integrated into the bumper. So we've designed kind of the entire bumper assembly, how it will mount, how the different sections mount together. It's got an orifice in there to mount the number plate light, which will cast light down onto the number plate. And then the lights themselves are going to be machined acrylic sections that sit into the apertures that we've made for the lights on the rear bumper. And then there's 2 backing pieces. One goes in, sandwiches the lens in, and that will hold the actual LED units that are going to do the lighting. And then there's a back cover over that as well, which will have an O-ring seal on it to make it completely watertight. And those will actually be accessed from inside the car. So when we do the metalwork on the back of the car, we're going to have some access hatches so you can actually take them out and remove the light units from inside without having to take the bumper off. The only thing we're waiting for on that is the LED. We're going to do some testing on some LED units to make sure we're happy with the brightness. At the moment we're hoping to do it with RGB LEDs, so we can actually use the same row of LEDs for various different functions, and we'll come up with an electronic controller that controls, so we can do indicators that sweep across, we can turn them to white for reverse lights, and we can use the same LEDs, as I say, for different functions. So we're going to do some testing with that, which I shall show you when we start doing that. But George's design work on the bumper, pretty much there, except for the way the lights are going to be mounted. Morris. Bonnet's on. Wanted to get that on, been meaning to want to get that on for a while actually, but on now so we can finish the radiator design. So there's a fabricated steel frame in there, and we just need to model the shape of the top tank before I send that away to get that made in aluminium. And I wanted to get the bonnet on so we could see what space we've got, because I want to have quite an enlarged sort of central top tank on there to give us quite a bit of expansion space. And obviously with the shape of the bonnet on this, you've got a big space in the middle to extend that up into. So that's on. God, what was the other thing? The dashboard. We've now received the infill panels that George designed, which were machined by Andy at Concept 303 very nicely. They look absolutely stunning. Again, the 3D scanning setups proved its worth. The fit of them is exceptional. And they are, although at a glance they look like they're a flat panel just with a ridged design around them, but actually the entire panel is slightly curved and in 2 planes as well, so it's a kind of compound curve with a slight twist and a curve this way on it. So they've come out really, really nice now. They've got to go away to be anodised, but other than that, they're ready to go in. And then the only thing actually at the moment that's holding us up is these tanks here. I'm waiting for these to be machined. That's just a 3D print, and there's another one on the other side, because those bolt in from the inside of the bulkhead. So I need to get those bolted on, and then I can put everything else behind the dash, and actually the interior will go together pretty quick then. So dash panels here, just waiting on the tanks, and then we can progress. Other thing might be worth briefly mentioning is we've painted the space saver spare, and got the fuel tank in. So John was designing and making up the straps here. They're very simple design, just a metal strap that anchors the fuel tank down to the mounting points that we incorporated previously. So that's pretty much done. He's also done the vent line on the tank that basically allows air to vent in and out. And he's just about to start doing the second vent. So there's 2 vents. I've probably talked about this previously on fuel tanks. Because the neck is, sort of cap is not vented, we have a small vent which allows either air out when it gets hot and it expands, or when you're actually using the fuel it needs to allow air in. So there's a small vent pipe for that. But then there's also a much larger vent pipe which just connects to the fuel neck, the filler neck, at the sort of uppermost part of it, right near the top. So when the fuel nozzle, when you're filling it, is in there, it goes down below that. So when the fuel tank is rapidly filling up and air needs to come out, rather than the escaping air trying to come up the filler neck and blowing the fuel back and clicking the pump out, the air that's escaping comes out of a vent in the neck right near the top, above where the fuel nozzle is. So it stops it kind of kicking back when you're trying to fill it. So we're just making up the lines for that as well. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. Stratos. George, I mentioned we were going to do the vents that go in here. We'd already done the rough design of them, but George wanted to rescan once we'd painted it, just in case the paint build-up affected how close a fit that was. So he's done that now. He's just drawing those. I imagine he'll finish those today, and then we'll be able to send that drawing off to have those machined. And then we also received the mould tool that we've had machined from MDF. That's Rich, who just walked through there actually. Rich is currently in the process of fiberglassing that piece, so he's got the sort of MDF mould that we had machined, and he's just wet laying up fiberglass over that at the minute. So we'll hopefully see that take shape over the coming few days. Hopefully by next week that'll be done, hopefully, fingers crossed, if it comes out successfully. And then there'll be various bits of fettling and sanding, and then we're going to paint that black. So with these vents done and that done and the air intakes that go on here finished, we'll be in a position where we can actually test this then. So nice to get some footage of that. Right, follow me through this way. Now, Nat's away on holiday this week, so we're taking a break. We're going back to the old school, how we used to do this, rather than doing the handover in the middle, and I'm going to do both sides. You have to excuse me if it's a bit briefer than normal in here, because it's not my area of expertise these days. So Project 1 Escort, Scott has been on the other arch tub, so I think he'd done that arch tub last week, or it was certainly in the latter stages. Nat talked about how he was making it with a tank rolled corner on them. He's now finished this side as well, it's clamped in place. I think we're just waiting for Nat to come back to give the okay on getting those welded in. So in the moment he's now moving on to the scuttle, which is one of the areas of the replacement panels on these which is not so good. This sort of main bulkhead panel, which is actually, it's the whole of this top section of bulkhead, including the scuttle right around to here. But the scuttle at the end here is fairly well out of shape of how it should be. And I have seen in a few restoration threads I've seen of these being built to a high standard, I noted that they're very often changing that bit there. So rather than completely change it, we've just reshaped this area basically on the scuttle. There's going to be a little bit more work to do here in lead just to get it perfect, but it's got to be leaded over this joint here anyway, because that becomes a smooth joint. So while we're doing the lead work on that, we'll put a bit of lead in here and just sculpt that to be exactly the right profile to get this line round here perfect, which is a classic like Mark 1 Escort point to look out for when you're looking at restored ones is how good this fit is here, because essentially all of the replacement wings are not quite right in that area, and the replacement scuttles are not quite right in that area. And in this case, the door's not quite right in that area either. I think Nat last week talked about the fact that we had better joy with the bubble arched wings than the non-bubble arched wings, which is why it's got these on. But we still had to take the entire reinforcer out of this section of the wing, reshape it all, do a fair bit of reprofiling around here to get it anything like the right shape. And on the doors, we've got to do a lot of unfolding. This one's not so bad, the other one is probably worse. On the other one, we're going to have to unfold the entire front edge and rework that. And the bottom of this one's not great. If you kind of look closely along the line at the bottom, you can kind of see it kind of waves and wiggles up and down a little bit as it goes along. So we're probably going to need to unfold that bottom edge on this and either make a new lower edge, or we may get away with unfolding it and refolding it. Can be difficult though, because it kind of, once you've unfolded it, getting it to be perfectly flat and refold in a different place is pretty tricky. But yeah, that's where we're at on that. Scott's just working on the other side of the scuttle, so we're pretty close to having the actual exterior panel work, sheet metal side of things buttoned up. And then we're going to start looking at the fit of the carbon bonnet and boot lid that we've got. So that's the next step on that. We'll have a little wander this way. So yeah, I mentioned about Rich doing the rear section for the Stratos, so he's just laying that up at the minute. It's actually upturned like that because there's quite a narrow orifice. It seems to be a word I use a lot lately, but at the very lower edge of the mould, there's almost a section like that because it sits into a really shallow part of the aperture for the rear window. So we've actually upended it so we could fill that with resin, because it's extremely difficult to get fiberglass down into there. So that looks like it's going okay. And I think on that note, I'm going to move on to Churchill. And Stu's basically been working on the rear arch lip shape, and then this area of the corner around here to basically complete this quarter panel. And it's been one of the most critical areas really to get the shape of this arch lip right, and the way the curve of the quarter panel comes in here. And actually initially it was looking a little bit too flat and slabby down here, so we've had a little readdress of that and brought the curve of this in slightly further underneath. And I saw that kind of all together, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it was looking absolutely spot on. So looking very good, Stu. And what I'm going to do is leave you all with a bit of a montage of Stu doing the panel work on this quarter. And we shall see you next week.